Hello, my name is Laura Carpenter Myers, and I'm the director of Van Cortlandt House Museum, and I'd like to welcome you here today. A little bit of the background about Van Cortlandt House is the surname clearly is of Dutch ancestry, but by the time the Van Cortlandts were building the house that I'm standing in today, if you look over my shoulder, you'll see that this is not a very Dutch-looking house. They chose a Georgian English style of architecture and vernacularized it or made it a little less refined than what you would find in the original ideation in England. And so we have this beautiful, elegant, not very Dutch house built by a family of Dutch ancestry. So come with me as I explore a little bit of Van Cortlandt House. We're not going to get to too much today, but you'll have to come back and visit. Follow me. One of the most recognizable Dutch elements in Van Cortlandt House are these Delft tiles surrounding the fireplace. Interestingly enough, Delft tiles are part of a larger group of tin-glazed earthenwares that can be found all throughout Europe, including Spain and Italy. The Dutch had already begun experimenting with their own tin-glazed earthenware in imitation of the Chinese export porcelain that was coming out of China, particularly the blue and white palette, of which the Dutch were very fond. So these tiles were both functional and decorative, and we see them applied here at Van Cortlandt House to do a couple of things. One is to brighten up the room. It's a very classic look. It was a signal by the Van Cortlandt family of their Dutch heritage and sort of a nod to their ancestry. But the other reason why Delft tiles were frequently used around the fireplace is that they had already been fired under high heat, and so they could withstand the heat coming off of the fireplace, and the glossy surface helped reflect the heat back out into the room. The other nod to their Dutchness was the incorporation of these paint colors that are really classic New York, both New York City, New York State. They are part of the New York City seal. They are the colors of the Mets, the Knicks, the Syracuse Orangemen. And I like to say that, if Americans bleed red, New Yorkers bleed orange and blue, because it really is a color scheme that goes back to the earliest days of New York City and New Amsterdam. This clock is actually a clock that probably would have been in a larger scale civic environment, perhaps a town hall, perhaps a club, perhaps a larger building, because most of the dwellings in Amsterdam tended to have lower ceilings. And so Van Cortlandt House was able to take this clock when it was given to us because we have nearly 14-foot ceilings. So now we've moved to the second floor of Van Cortlandt House in a room that's rather incongruous with the rest of this sort of mid-18th century English colonial house. The room we're standing in right now is what we call the Dutch colonial room, or the Dutch room. And this room was originally a third bedchamber on the second floor of Van Cortlandt House. So by 1917, the colonial dames were like, we want to establish a period room that would represent a room from a common household in New Amsterdam. And so that's why we have the room here today. So curiously enough, rather than destroy the original architecture of the house and change what we call the fenestration, or the arrangement of windows on the outside, they actually had the architect build walls in from the house, from the original walls of the house. And so when you look from the outside, you do not realize that there are these casement windows inside. Downstairs, I had talked about the difference between sort of blue and white Delft and decorative objects versus utilitarian objects. And so here on the table, we have a couple of utilitarian objects. One is this very simple, elegant, lobed fruit bowl, and it has no decoration whatsoever. And even though it doesn't have any decoration, it's still considered or classified as Delft because it was made in Holland, and it is a tin-glazed earthenware. Next to it, we have what's called a standing salt. And the purpose of this was to both contain salt for the whole table in the center depression, and then these sort of snail shells, and I'm not gonna set the plate down, but I'm gonna do my best little demo. It was also, those snails could hold a serving plate that could be hot and keep it off of your table. Most New Amsterdam dwellings were sort of almost one room, and so if you didn't want to have everybody who was visiting or have to look at your bed the whole day, you would close the door. It's like the original Murphy bed. I guess is the best description. And this is a studio apartment. Here's Van Cortlandt House Dutchness in a nutshell. Thanks for visiting.